Hello and welcome to another episode of the Game Design Podcast. Once again, my name is Brad Carney, and I'm the founder of Final Boss Entertainment, who recently developed Rack. If you're unfamiliar with Rack, just imagine a game that gives you every mod for free without charging, and that's basically Rack. So today we're talking about playstyles. We touched on this briefly during the episode about balance, but it's something that warrants a more in-depth discussion. After all, if you're making a game to appeal to a broad audience, you need to make sure that it appeals to different types of people who will approach the game differently. If you make a fighting game and the only playstyle it appeals to is holding back and throwing fireballs, the lame game, not a lot of people are going to find it interesting. So, it's important that designers have a good grasp over what different playstyles there are. People come in all shapes and sizes, and playstyles are no different. In fact, like a snowflake, no two are really the same. Just like there are three primary colors and infinite combinations of those three, playstyles have different combinations of aggression, defensiveness, strategic calculation, bold risk-taking, and so on. I think to some extent, this comes from something called the four temperaments. Without boring everyone too much with silly things like explanations. After all, it's not like you're here to learn. I know you just want my thoughts on Furious 7 or something. It's basically a theory from the ancient Greeks that states that there are four distinct personality types. It still holds up well and is often used in modern writing with tropes like the five-man band. And I think it can be used to better understand playstyles when it comes to gaming. So, what are the four temperaments? Well, the first one is the choleric temperament, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. But these are people who are highly ambitious, tend to be leaders, are easily angered, and restless. So, for those of you who have played Rack, this was Kane's temperament. And in the upcoming Age of Ultron, it's also Captain America's temperament. And it's also mine. When it comes to games, these are people who want to dominate. They want to do well, extremely well. They'll seek out the best strategies they can and complete every challenge given to them. The next one is the sanguine temperament. Again, pretty sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. But these are people who are very carefree, social, outgoing, uplifting, courageous, and fun. Again, for you Rack players, this was Fabian's temperament, as well as Iron Man's in the Avengers. These are people who aren't willing to grind for achievement or skill, but they still want to have a lot of fun. If there's some strategy or character or weapon that's a lot of fun, they're on board, even if it theoretically doesn't maximize their chance of winning. Getting to not do the boring thing keeps them motivated and engaged, and able to perform better in the long run. The third type is the phlegmatic temperament. Once again, no confidence that I'm pronouncing that correctly. But these are the people who are thoughtful and intellectual, caring, calm, and peaceful. For Rack players, this was Starlin's temperament. And it's also the Hulk's temperament when he's not an enormous green rage monster. I think these are people who get almost as much joy out of discussing a game as they do playing it, which is why they make great podcast guests. Giving these people options with complexity can really help keep them mentally stimulated and playing for years to come. And the final type is the melancholic temperament, and I know I'm pronouncing that correctly, but these people tend to be serious, critical, suspicious, and tend to be loners. For Rack players, we were going to introduce a character with this temperament, but it's gonna have to wait. When it comes to the Avengers, in the animated series, The Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, this was Hawkeye, but considering he has no personality whatsoever in the movies, I'm gonna go with Thor on this one. Anyway, these players tend to be very analytical and calculated when it comes to games. They're not afraid to ruffle any feathers. If there's an unconventional, against-the-grain style of play that can be made to work, this temperament is all for it. Anyway, with all that pseudo-psychology out of the way, I think you can see how there's a foundation of different playstyles. Melancholic types will want to approach a game one way, and sanguine types another. Is any one type right? Definitely not. Real life rewards people of all different personality types, and a well-designed game is no different. So, coming up, I'll be talking about this in depth with Andrew Roznovsky, who is my guest for episode 2. And we talk about a lot of really interesting things, including the styles encountered through different games, the idea of glass cannons, and challenge characters. It was a lot of fun. So, here's the conversation we had, and I'll be back at the end to wrap it up. So thanks for joining me again here in the studio.
Oh, no problem.
And I've studio in air quotes. By that I mean my kitchen. I think it's nice to kind of do these in person. It's a little more personable, a little more richness of the feedback. Yep. You can see your face as you grimace at the horrible things I say.
We can stumble over each other's words easier, so.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like last time you were out, we were talking about balance, and we were kind of talking about how it's important for games to have, give players different options to work with so that it's not just one gun that automatically beats all of them, or that it's just one play style that just automatically wins. It would obviously be bad if a fighting game only defensive Turtles won, because first of all the amount of people who would be able to enjoy the game would only be those incredibly boring people no one wants to watch, which is why I have no fans. And then it's it would just be boring. There wouldn't be any thought that goes into oh my god, I should pick this character, I should do this. So I mean playstyles is a big part of balance. And I thought it was interesting. I thought it'd be a good topic to kind of actually discuss what some of those playstyles are. So it's different people have different ways of playing games, different ways of approaching them. Yeah, I think it's important for designers to understand what those styles are, so they can kind of design their elements in ways to kind of cater to those different styles. So
yeah, I agree.
First of all, thanks for being on again.
Sure. No problem, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Want to give you a chance to speak. Don't want to.
That's fine. I'm collecting my thoughts. So
yeah. So why don't we get into some of those thoughts a little bit now? So for those of you who don't know, both of us are big fighting game players. We're definitely not about to play fighting games as soon as this is over.
Nope.
But so I mean, we both play fighting games a lot. We're both long veterans of fighting games.
Don't date us, please.
I know. I think I just called us both very old.
Yeah.
But so why don't we talk a little bit about some of the different styles that you encounter in fighting games? So
sure.
I think for the most part, there are three main styles that people recognize. There's zoning, there's grappling, there's rushing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about all of those different styles?
So the first one is probably the first one you mentioned, zoning. That's pretty straightforward. A lot of people, whether you've played fighting games, competitively like Brad and I have or not, everyone's pretty much played a Street Fighter at some point. You use Ryu, he's kind of like the hero of Street Fighter, for lack of a better term, because it doesn't really have a story, but that's neither here nor there. Well, anyway, everyone always remembers, throwing fireballs and stuff, like Hadoukens and everything, and that's really the basis of zoning as we understand it today.
It's basically you're trying to keep people away while chipping them.
Right, exactly, yeah. So, chip damage in a fighting game is when, you the opponent, you'll block it, but you still get a certain amount of damage. So, originally there wasn't chip damage, and then, you could block all day. Opponent could just have perfect defense. You couldn't do anything about it. So, they're like, well, let's reward a player for taking a risk, throwing a special move out, and then that will do block damage. So, that's when, some of the, on the other games, you'll see a cheap win or something like that is the block damage. But, that's, so you can't just block all day.
Right.
So zoning is, typically the zoning archetype is you're on the other side of the screen, as far away from the other characters you can get.
Right.
And typically you're throwing, a lot of stuff on the screen, projectiles, you're setting traps if traps are in your characters, move lists and stuff.
I guess zoning is kind of a style that kind of it's basically geared towards people who don't necessarily want to take a lot of risks. They want to stay safe at all times. So they kind of want to stay out of danger zones. They want to keep you away from them, and so it's just kind of people who are just naturally kind of defensive. And
for the most part, the thing about it is Brad, he's more of a defensive. He's more of a zoning type kind of guy, I would say, in fighting games and stuff. And
I'm very lame.
It has it has the connotation of being lame, which that's a whole nother subject. But I've played, keep away is another term that you might hear called zoning. But learning, the basic
zoning
idea,
is like when you want it to sound nice.
Exactly, yeah. Zoning's like, the nice way of putting keep away.
Right.
But, the best
like
way...
the custodial engineer for
right.
janitors.
Exactly, yeah, well, yeah. Yeah. But basically, zoning is what you got to think about is you want to prevent those people from moving. And if you can't prevent them from straight up moving, then you want them to only move in spaces where you want them to be.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so in addition to it rewarding people who are just naturally defensive, it also rewards you for recognizing patterns and recognizing certain situations.
Then that's where I was going with that. Yeah, I mean exactly. It's like
sorry, I didn't mean to take your point from you.
No, not a problem. I mean, it's one of the many examples in fighting games and in any of these games we're going to be talking about in general. It's once you understand your opponent's tendencies, it's like. In situation X, he always moves to this spot, so you can play off those tendencies and stuff.
Yeah, or it's like you only have the option to move to this spot, so you kind of
and then you
work
can game
with that. It's like chess
there.
has the same kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Chess, StarCraft, any FPS, go down the list, sports, anything like that. It's very common. So
foreshadowing.
Yeah, exactly. So grappling is the second one that he talked about, and that is that is similar to Rushdown in that you want to be close to your opponent. But in grappling, what you're doing is you're using in almost every fighting game an unblockable grab that will set up your opponent. You get guaranteed damage, and then what happens is you'll set them up, they get hit by it, and then you're almost always in a set position away from the opponent. So they wake up at a disadvantage. Depending on the game, blah blah blah. They only have generally one or two options there you can go. And grappling is very close. It's all three of the styles have reads, and it's kind of what we were just talking about. It's like, hey, I want them to be here at this point. But grappling is a lot more like, I don't know, maybe because I understand it the least out of the three personally. It's very much, it's very much like a feel based. It's just you gotta, if you have a great read on your opponent, then you're gonna, you'll do really well with it.
Yeah, it's like the other styles might be 25% about reading the opponent, or it's this is more 75%.
Yeah, I really do. And there's advanced tactics and stuff with that, like there is with anything else. But generally, typically in the competitive fighting games that I've watched and been a part of, grappling is less seen than the other two, I would say. Yeah. And it's a different mindset than the other two. And I'm not saying it's any easier or more difficult, but it's definitely, Brad and I are not grappler type people, so we're, it's hard to, I can't really get into it very much. So.
Yeah. So, what kind of person, do you think would be a grappler? We kind of established, it's like a more defensive. Yeah. Kind of person, maybe conservative is the wrong word. Is more of the zoning, but like a grappler, is that someone who, I think you have to be a very patient person to pull it off. Very, very analytical, very.
Yes. Yeah, I think, in a lot of respects, it's almost the most calculated approach. Yeah. And, to Brad's point, it's very patient. Of all of the three styles, it's definitely the most patient. You have to, be blocking quite a bit. You have to be willing to not, feel pressure as, you're just watching your life go away by either getting hit cleanly or blocking and taking block damage. You just, you have to make your opportunities count because they're generally a little bit, less, less frequent than the other two. Right.
Yeah, so it's for people who really think clearly under pressure, because usually you have to really get up close to give yourself all these options. So it's kind of like in sports, like a quarterback. They talk about quarterbacks who can throw from a muddy pocket. Yep. So say you got defenders all around you. People who are trying to sack you, and the quarterbacks who can stay calm under that pressure and throw at the right time and spot to the right person. Those people do really well. So it's kind of similar to that. And
and another thing to go back of the type of person who might excel at grappling, playing a grappling archetype is if you enjoy applying pressure to someone or in a situation and reacting and to see what they do and making them I guess play chicken, they move first and then you can react. If you feel comfortable, just sitting there and letting people basically, kill themselves in a fighting game. It's right up your alley.
Yeah. So I guess if you enjoyed playing chicken as a kid because you know the other person is going to move before you do or whatever, that you might be a natural grappler.
Exactly. You might be, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the third kind of style that gets classified heavily is like the pixie, like the rush down type. So, it's like this is for people who, it's like they want to, they're highly aggressive people who kind of want to overwhelm their opponents with offense. It's like they kind of get into their face and, they attack with such just overwhelming force that it's like, it's just hard to stand up to it. Yep. And I mean, it's a style that does depend on reads somewhat. Like, like in a fighting game, like if this person's been blocking high all the time, you attack low. But it's not a style that relies heavily on that necessarily.
I would say it's less read based, and in a lot of fighting games, it's very much so momentum based. Once you get into a flow and you start hitting your opponent, talking as someone who's been on the receiving end of this in tournaments and stuff, it's once the snowball gets rolling down the hill, it's pretty hard to stop it. And typically if you're a type of person who gets into a rhythm and you're just firing all cylinders and stuff, you're probably going to be more tend to rush down. I think straightforward, or it's very up pace.
Yeah. Like, you use the word rhythm there. Like, I feel like that's a perfect way to describe it because, like, that kind of speaks to how easy it is to disrupt that style. It's like as we kind of start to tie this to sports a little bit. I think like the perfect analogy for this in like football is Oregon, like the college football team.
Exactly.
So, like, for those who don't know, like this is the team that went to the
national championship.
Yeah, the national championship game. They were like one of the two best teams, but it's like they just like steamrolled over everyone they played all through the series. It's like every game was like 70-3, and it was just like an absolute beatdown. So it's like you would have thought going into like the final game, it's like of course they're going to crush them. They've done this to every other opponent of theirs, including who they played in the semifinals. But this is a style that like once you run into like a defense that can stand up to it, it completely throws the rhythm off. Of the team and the players. So they went up against Ohio State, who was one of these like heavily defensive teams, and like they shut down their offense. It's like they stopped them early. I think I didn't see too much of the game, and it was
I mean,
but it's like they stopped them, and like then they couldn't get anything else kind of going after that.
To not get too technical, Oregon's game plan was basically, They get quick first downs, which in football you have 4 downs to make 10 yards, and then their offense was predicated on getting that first down, and then once they did that, the rhythm had been established. The momentum's completely in their favor. They just go down the field pretty easily. Well, the way to stop that is to prevent them from getting that first down on their drive. And what happened was, they kept going 3 and out, which means you went 3 straight plays, you didn't get 10 yards, so. It makes sense to give the ball back at a worse field position for the other people.
Right.
And what happens was, they never got a rhythm, so they never got going. And that's just like it is in rushdown and fighting games. If you can, a zoner, in my opinion, is trying to. They dictate the pace and the rhythm of the game in a completely different, on the opposite side of the coin. Now, my opinion, a grappler just doesn't care about any kind of pacing.
Yeah,
just is like, good, thanks for my chance, so you're dead.
But you see that a lot in fighting games where it's like, kind of like Oregon. It's like throughout a tournament, like one player will look like they're just, oh my god, this dude is unstoppable. He's just absolutely crushing everyone, and then he'll like get to like the finals or close to the finals, and they just fall apart like a house of cards because they run into a player with like just excellent defense. You kind of get a couple stops on them, and that kind of stops them in their tracks. They don't get that momentum going.
I mean, if a rushdown player can't get their momentum going, it's the other, it's in the other player's favor. It's hard, if they can't get the snowball going down the mountain, it's over.
And that's why, like in fighting games, sports, even life, it's like you don't see like the kind of heavily aggressive, players, teams, countries, whatever. It's like they do well, but it's like they're never really on top. It's like they generally don't take it all. It's the people who are more defensive and entrenched, and it's like those people tend to win in the long run.
Ideally, you want balance, but typically, if you look at it, at the end of the day, you want to be 55 more defensive base, 45 offense if you can,
Yeah.
That might be the perfect, ratio for life. So there's my life advice for the podcast. So
Yeah.
55% defensive, 45% offensive in your choices.
Sounds good to me.
I do what I can.
Yeah. So we talked last episode how you're like a big StarCraft player. What kinds of, like, without rehashing StarCraft too much, I assume most people know, or at least somewhat familiar with StarCraft. It's an RTS with 3 alien races. I know it's 3 now. So, but like, what are some like play styles that you encounter in that? Is it like the same kind of mix, like the same kind of like pixie defense?
So like we discussed last time, the races are kind of, they're designed in a way, and their units are kind of guide you towards a path of, the Terran, which are the humans, they're kind of neutral. Their units cost, they're kind of the neutral race. The Zerg are the much more rushed down.
Pixies, right?
Yeah, they're the pixie. Like, their units have no health. You can build them quickest. You can just throw it out there. Protoss are the slow guys, but they have the best defense per unit and stuff. Playstyles is a big thing in StarCraft because, kind of going back into patching that whole area, in
Episode 2.
Exactly. That episode 2 is better than Attack of the Clones, so just wanted to say that.
Wow.
I'm sorry. Had to throw that out
Shots fired.
Yeah, but no, oftentimes.
Well, this episode's 7. I think this is 6.
I don't know. Yeah, who knows? There's no Ewoks. I don't think. Might be at the end. I don't know. But they designed the Zerg to be this way, but patching, Blizzard's like, well, let's actually make them like this. But the best way I can describe it is, for the majority of StarCraft, I'm just talking about Brood War, considering it's basically done in the competitive landscape. Everyone's, it's fully mature. Everyone now is playing, StarCraft 2. The Zerg always were the aggressor, and from early on, they were heavily rushed down. And then, Terran players tended to be a little bit more defensively based. And, like, one of the biggest things about the Terran were almost all the early builds, early game builds, and make sure you got, hey, I got to have this by 10 minutes into the game or whatever. The Terran almost always built defense first. They always concentrated on defense first because their defense was very good considering units and buildings that they could construct. And the Protoss were kind of, jack of all trades is what it ended up being. It's like, hey, our stuff's pretty good, but we can get away with our units. So, funny enough, I fancy myself more of a zoner in fighting games, but I actually enjoyed the Zerg in StarCraft, which is much more of the rush down offense in your face race. Terran is the defensive specialist in a lot of people's eyes. I couldn't play him. And it's just because, I guess thinking about it now here in hindsight, my defensive skills in StarCraft, they were okay, but my offensive skills probably weren't as good. So I was, propped up by the fact that the Zerg were just amazing at offense on their own. So it covered all that up.
Right.
But, when I played Terran, I couldn't do it. So, you see typically, the guys who are like, really into it in their face, want to get all, constantly attacking and everything is more Zerg. The defensive guys are much more Terran. Right. And then I would say more of the, malleable jack of all trades people tend to migrate towards Protoss.
Yeah, and I think you see, like, I think there's certain people who appreciate having like a character who's better overall, but like much more difficult to play. Like you'll see certain characters like in a fighting game, to go back to that a little bit. It's like they have just like tons of different options to approach a situation. Like a character like Dante in MVC3 or like Storm in MVC2. Just like an extremely well-rounded character. So it's but it only gives you like maybe like a slight advantage. Whereas like you have like other characters who are like very one-dimensional.
Yes.
It's like this character, like all you do with him, you just rush down, you just go nuts with him. So it's like I think there are certain players who appreciate playing a player with or a character or team or whatever with like a lot of different options, and it gives them it's like the people who are more analytical. I think that's a little more appealing to them.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example is, just to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit, like Brad has, he has his team in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and I have my team, and they're very different construction. Mine is Magneto, Doctor Doom, Virgil, and my whole game plan, basically, funny that I'm saying this, is, Magneto and Doctor Doom are pretty good on their together. They have good synergy. They work out well together. Mm-hmm. But basically, the whole point of the team is it's, Magneto and Doctor Doom do their thing. But if they lose, I have Virgil left, and Virgil is, if he's not the best last, character to have on your team, he's top 2, I would say. I mean, I'm not going to go 3, 2.
Yeah.
So, he's kind of
one,
like
maybe.
He's kind of like it's like, oh, I lost. I should lose this, but the character is so amazing with the X Factor mechanic in the game. That
for those who don't know, there's like a comeback mechanic in the game. So it's like you have this thing called X Factor where it's like once per match you get to activate it, and then you go faster, your moves do more damage, and like certain characters just really benefit disproportionately from it. So it's like certain characters, it's like you put them last, you give them the strongest X Factor in the game, and like they just become amazing. Like they'll just rip through your whole team.
Right. And that's Virgil's on my team to collect the wins that I don't deserve, but I'm just like, hey, you know what? It's in the game. And then Brad's team is much more, his is Morgan, Doctor Doom, Dormammu, and it's very much based on the principle of zoning. It's like, I'm going to prevent you from moving. You're just going to slowly die, taking damage, and you're going to like it.
And I'm going to put the audience to sleep while doing it.
That's right. So yeah, I mean, he's not, Brad doesn't play what esports wants. I play the stuff. I am, I'm playing for the people or something like that.
Virgil comebacks aside, yeah.
Or, I'm
either
playing the team that the crowd loves or the reason that people hate Marvel 3. So, depending on, your mileage may vary kind of thing. So.
Right, yeah.
But, people, it just depends on what you want. It goes back to what we were talking about in the previous episode, being able to express your personality through a game. Right. I sometimes, God knows I'm stubborn enough that's like, my God, I'm going to win this match with Terran no matter what. You know what I mean? You put personal challenges on yourself, and people get what they want.
That's a pretty normal thing, though.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
everyone's stubborn. I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
Well, you are a little bit. I wouldn't say too much, but I rolled my eyes, but couldn't.
For
see
those
that.
of you who couldn't see.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. But it's like Virgil. I would consider him like one of those like he's. I wouldn't say simple, but like. Mm-hmm. He's kind of like the opposite of like the multi-option character. Like all he's trying to do is like mix you up constantly. Like he's not just kind of like going crazy, going ham, as they like to say.
Yeah, I mean, Virgil is the equivalent of a lot of other. There's a lot of other examples in fighting or in games in general. If I can speak, in Modern
it's a challenge for me.
In Modern Warfare 2, it was the ACR, which if people who know Modern Warfare 2 know very well that gun. It's basically a automatic rifle that has when you aim down the sights, which you can in Call of Duty, it has no recoil, which means that you can sit there and shoot and it will never waver from the aim, which is just ridiculous. And also,
fair.
And also you can add an attachment on it called a grenade launcher, which was just extremely good. So, that was a very defined, it's like, look, it does this stuff really well. It's really good. It takes a lot less time to get good with that than maybe, like an all pistol loadout in that game or, in StarCraft, God knows I'm a shining example of this, Zerg Rush and Brood War, you just, the Zerg could get a lot of units really quickly that, if you had no idea what to do against it, you were pieced out. And it was one of those strategies that you basically had to know how to play against that if you wanted to be competitive or, win more matches than not. Because, typically it was so good that that would be the first thing I'd do against someone I'd never played. Just like, okay, let's see if they can handle it. And if they couldn't, then I'm going to keep on doing it. Just like, in football, if you can't stop the 30-yard pass down the field, they're going to keep on calling a 30-yard pass down the field and so on and so on.
It's like there's an article about this guy named David Serlin who's like I think he has like a game out on Steam. I think he made a game called like Chess 2. He has a game on Amazon called Pendante. But basically he's like an old school fighting games player.
Yeah.
And, just he has like all kinds of articles on game design and stuff. And probably need to talk to him about coming on the show eventually. But he has an article where he talks about how it's like when he'd go in like an Alpha 3 match, Street Fighter Alpha 3, he picks Zangief, and all he would do is like just jump up and body splash over and over again. Because he's like, okay, if you don't know how to handle this, like it's perfectly safe. I'm not taking any risk. I'm just making sure like you know how to handle this. Because if you don't, like I'm just going to win for free, and then there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas if you do know how to handle it, it's like, okay, you fireball me once or something. And then, okay, I lost like a tiny bit of life, and we go back into it.
Yeah, I mean, you got to feel your opponent out early, in any, one-on-one kind of scenario. It's if, you figure out that, like I said in StarCraft, they couldn't handle the Zerg rush, well, I'm not, I have no incentive to do anything else until I get bored of it. And then, I'll go challenge myself. But, at that point I've established, it's like, okay, I've got that down and you don't. So, and that's fighting games, chess, football, any competitive environment, it's all the same.
Right.
It's not going to change no matter what you're playing.
Yeah. And, there are people out there who... they want to challenge themselves. It's like they don't necessarily want to pick like a character conducive to their style or all that. Like you see this a lot in like not necessarily competitive games. Like for instance, like the Binding of Isaac. That's a roguelike kind of dungeon crawler, and it's a game where like you can pick like any of like 10 different characters. Yeah. And like there's like at least one or two where it's like this character intentionally sucks. Like there's they're not balanced in any way. There's no like upside to playing them.
Not good.
Yeah, it's like you just pick them like, okay, and the challenge is beat the character like with this, beat the game with this crappy character.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, there's certain people that appeals to. Yep. And like even fighting games, which are like competitive, it's like there are low tier characters like in most games, and it's like there's a reason to pick them, and it's like you want to challenge yourself.
Yep. Yeah,
which is why Shenko gets any love, or like who's someone in Smash who's terrible?
Charizard.
Sonic now. Hey.
Too soon.
We won't go into that.
That was a low blow.
Sorry.
I may or may not play a certain fast hedgehog in that game, but anyway, no, like Wii Fit Trainer, or Charizard.
Charizard.
They are not very good, and you'll run into what's called character specialists in the fighting game community, where it's like they hone in, that's what they play, and they're counting on you not knowing the matchup, and them knowing how to play against you. They're using their knowledge, your lack of knowledge, against you. So, and it's effective.
Yeah, it's almost like so like there's this book I've been reading on business marketing and stuff, and it's talking about how it's kind of comparing marketing to warfare.
Okay.
Marketing Warfare is the name of the book. Surprise, surprise. But it's talking about how it's like companies should have like 4 different approaches like to marketing based on like how big they are. So like big companies, like they say like you should have a defensive approach where it's like you just kind of like entrench yourself. Like you kind of sit in the trenches and you have an advantage over anyone trying to attack you. So it's basically like you have an advantage. You try and prevent others from taking over that advantage at any cost.
Okay.
And then it's like I read the second one, but the third one's like a flanking attack. So it's like basically like if you're kind of like a small to like mid-sized company, it's like you attack only at weak points.
Yeah.
And then the fourth is like guerrilla, which is kind of like you make a quick strike and you disappear completely, and then you kind of repeat. But the flanking attack, I kind of feel like that's like kind of like part of the gimmicky character players, like the character specialists. Like it's kind of like they kind of have like this one thing they do. And it's kind of like they're exploiting like the one weakness you have, which is like, okay, you're playing this like amazing character, but maybe you don't know how to fight Charizard. Maybe you don't know how to.
Yeah, no, that's really good point. I'm trying to think of.
I'm not sure like it's 100% analog, but
no, I'm just trying to think of a good example, and here a perfect example going back to fighting games, shocking to no one, is in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. At one point, he was the second best character in the game. I don't know. He's probably third at the end of the game. But Sentinel, from the X-Men comics, he was amazing in that game for a litany of reasons. he was huge. He was fast for no reason. He did a ton of damage, which is expected. But he had a really bad matchup against a low tier character called Venom from Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Venom has a move in that game where he attacks you. It's kind of weird. It's hard to explain, I guess, in words without seeing it. But he attacks you with his body, I guess, for lack of a better term.
It's like his body stretches out.
Yeah,
the entire distance of the screen.
And Sentinel's options there's a lot that's just shut down with that. And it's. He's an amazing character. He destroys, there's 56 characters in that game. He probably destroys 48 of them, no problem. But he has, his tools are shut down by this, otherwise garbage character's tools. And, that's an example of a flanking attack,
Yeah.
It's like, perfect example.
Right. It's like the person doing that, like, they're probably not going to be everyone. But it's like the players that they run into play, like, this one great character for the most part, it's going to have trouble against that person. Or,
like in Marvel 3, Chris Redfield against Morgan, which is, kind of this flanking attack. Yeah, that's a good point because, I'm starting to think about that now. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff,
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Which is part of the reason for this podcast.
Stimulating the mind.
Exactly. So,
getting those gears turning.
Mission accomplished. So, like, another style that, like, we've kind of touched on a little bit, but I don't think we've fully talked about it. It's like, kind of like the glass cannon character.
Yes.
So, this is kind of like any character who's, like, incredibly, like, strong and just, like, really just powerful in a it's not necessarily like a lot of different ways, but it's like maybe they'll have like one move that's like really good, or it's like they'll have a bunch of different options when used together they're really strong. But then like to compensate for that, it's like they have like really low health. So it's like if they take any kind of damage, like they pretty much die. But it's like the idea is like you have all these different tools, so like you shouldn't take damage.
Right.
It's like to kind of balance it out. So it's like like a character like Phoenix and Marvel's
perfect
Capcom
example.
3. Yeah, she has like by far the lowest health in the game. It's like she has like less than 50% of like what most other characters have. So it's like pretty much like if you hit her, she's gonna die. But like this is a character that transforms. I'm not gonna get into all of that, but let's just say regular Phoenix minus 5 meters to keep it simple. But it's like she's a character like on her own she's like really strong, like she has all these movement options,
right?
She can basically wiggle her way out of like most situations. She can overpower you in most situations. She has like a super that goes through everything, so if you try and like hit her with something,
she can heal herself.
She can heal herself. She has teleports, like really strong fireballs. Like she's just like a jack of all trades who's incredibly strong.
Yeah, exactly.
But she has that low health, so it's like if you kind of get that one hit on her, like she's dying, like pretty much no matter what.
Yeah, typically you'll see, in fighting games, the way that they balance, basically if you go into a fighting game and you sit there and do a little bit of research and you find a character who has lower health than the rest of the cast, you're probably going to find out that they have amazing options.
Right.
It's exactly like Phoenix, Akuma in Street Fighter games is typically he has lower health than everyone else, but he has an answer for everything, and what he does probably better than most of the cast. And in a kind of a related note, they do that in StarCraft, and you'll see it. And it's more toward it's a different way of balancing it, but it's pretty much the same. And it's typically like the really high price units, the one you get towards what's called the late game when everyone's got to the last stuff they can build and you've started upgrading your armor and your weapons and stuff. The example that comes to mind is the Zerg. They have a unit, an air unit called a Guardian, and it is basically it's an air unit that can hit ground only, which is kind of one of the ways they've balanced it. But taking that out, his attack, he can actually attack buildings and units further than he can actually see, which sounds weird, but basically the way you get around that is you send a smaller unit out to go past, and he can see, he can hit it, but he can't see it.
Right.
So you can get, you can be sitting there getting destroyed by the stuff you can't see, and because it's pretty much that range that he can shoot. that he can fire is longer than any other range in the game. No one can hit him if he's max distance. So, it's like, wow, that's amazing. And the damage is it does amazing amounts of damage. He gets bonus damage on buildings. I mean, it's really good, but the one balance to that is, one, it's an extremely expensive unit. It costs 2 of your subunits, they have to morph together to do it. And then he can't hit air units. So you just send, like the lowest level air unit to go fight him. There's nothing he can do. And that's it's kind of in StarCraft, you build a varied army, but when you get towards the end, there's amazing units that oh my god, they're like amazing against ground, but they have this glaring weakness, or and that's how it's done in like StarCraft. But it's the same kind of idea.
So it's kind of like you assemble Voltron and then you like tap him and he dies.
Basically.
If by tapping, I mean like just send like the one right unit at him.
Yeah. And another.
It's like that one proton torpedo going in against the Death Star.
Exactly. And like a lesser example of that in StarCraft is there's a unit called a Dark Templar, and the whole gist of him is he has a sword that does an amazing amount of damage per hit, and it's like is incredibly strong, and he's cloaked so you can't see him, but he has low health, shocking. And if you have like what's called a detector that can see cloaked units, they're pretty much pieced out. But if you get someone who doesn't have one, by the time they can get one over there, he's pretty much wrecked you. So you gotta they have stuff like that, and yay Protoss if you like that, but and Terran have nukes, which do a lot, but a lot to set up. A lot of stuff in StarCraft is like really good, but it takes an incredible amount of resources and time and everything.
So it's like you kind of have to like plan perfectly. Like you gotta cover your setups.
I mean that, and some of those I'm describing are all ins, like which is basically like this has got to work, and if it doesn't work, I haven't built enough. Backup, I'm screwed. Right? It's just like, oh, good game. GG, go to the next match. If it works, it's brilliant. If it doesn't, oh well. It's the high risk, high reward thing. So,
no, I think that's a really interesting way to handle the glass cannon kind of idea. Yeah, so it's more kind of, it's not necessarily like you get it and then once you do you're amazing, but if you get hit once like you're dead or whatever. It's like it's acquiring it like is the hard part. And it sounds like in the case of that one air unit that doesn't hit against the air, like it still has that increased vulnerability. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of the time, that there's a lot of matches, especially the higher up you get, competitively, more often than not, you never get to the point of the game where you can actually get that unit, right? So, like there's ways, that, it's amazing if you can get it, but you're gonna get it more often. You're not gonna get it more often than you do. Yeah. But it rewards you for surviving 20 minutes or whatever. Right. Yeah. So it's similar. It's kind of different. I guess the best glass cannon would be a Dark Templar in StarCraft because he's basically like Akuma, cloaked. Yeah, and I think for the most part, it's like most glass cannons are kind of like Akuma, where it's like high damage, low health. Right. And like this game that just came out, this past week called Crypt of the Necrodancer, which is something I talked about last week. Probably need to do a whole episode on that game. Oh my god. But it's like it literally has like glass items in it. Where it's like that's awesome. Yeah. So you have like a glass dagger, glass longsword, and it's like they do the most damage in the game. Right. But then if you like get hit once, like it shatters. That's pretty cool. And then you just have like a glass shard you can pick up, and that's like back to like regular damage. So, but it's like they have glass armor, which like completely absorbs one hit, and then it shatters, and then you're back to being this vulnerable sob. That sounds pretty cool, though. Yeah. I mean, that's and it's like literally as glass cannon as you can get. Right, yeah. I like it. Sometimes it's nice when it's spelled out that clearly. Exactly. Just right on the nose. Yeah, take the subtlety out. Yeah. But so you were kind of talking about how, like, in competitive play, this is not necessarily like a viable thing so much. I do think it's important to like kind of talk about how like this is like a very important thing. This idea of like appealing to different play styles. Like for pretty much anything competitive, like it's something like you absolutely have to have. Otherwise, it's like
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like it's too hard to like draw enough people into the competitive scene. You know, it's like if you have like a fighting game that like only appeals to grapplers.
Yep.
Like, you're just not going to have that many people playing it. Mm-hmm. It's not going to work.
And, you know, a perfect example of that is, you know, if you look at the fighting games that have come out, because, you know, there were a ton of fighting games coming out from probably like 1994 to 2002. There's a ton of them. And, you know, not all of them caught on, but the ones that caught on were huge. And, you know, you look back at some of the ones that didn't catch on, you know, once you understand, you know, kind of what we're talking about here, you know, there's generally 3 types of styles that are pretty good. And, you know, and we kind of mentioned the glass cannon concept. We mentioned, you know, like the low tier, you know, character specialists, you know, intentionally playing people who aren't as good. There's a concept that, you know, in a fighting game, you know, there needs to be a certain amount of characters that are good for, you know, the game to be competitively viable. Like, I read an article, I can't remember where I read it, so I apologize for not being able to source it. But
unforgivable.
I know, but it said roughly, you know, if a fighting game has a top tier, you know, these are the accepted best characters, generally like 3 to 5 or 6 people, then it's pretty much competitively viable for as long as people want to play it. And I thought about that, and I was like, well, yeah, you know, I can think about it. And, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is a perfect example. It has 4 characters. But, you know, there's a game like Capcom vs. SNK 1, which came out in 2000, and it devolved very quickly that there was one character who was clearly better than everyone else in the game.
Was it Zero? No.
Basically, you know. And then that...
SVC.
Yeah, and then that, and before that, people had determined that, well, not to go into too much detail, you know, there was one set style of playing the game that was much better than all the rest, and you know, it wasn't even competitively viable to try anything else. And this was determined within the first months of the game, so you know, no one played the game because it was boring.
Right, yeah.
So I mean, perfect example of, you know, hey, you know,
that's why we do the podcast.
Just like Brad
talk
said,
about these mistakes.
It's just like, man, grapplers are good. Well, you know, never mind. Forget that game.
What was the style in that game?
It was
like all pixies, right? Like all ratio 1.
Yeah, it was all ratio 1s. There was a complicated ratio system that, you know, you could pick. It was ratio 1 to 4, and a ratio 1 character would have, you know, the least amount of damage. You know, it could produce the least amount of damage, and then ratio 2 did more, ratio 3 did more, ratio 4 did the most. Well, it just turns out some of the way the game's mechanics turned out, it's just, well, you must play 4 characters, because these 4 characters that are in this set ratio system are better than most of the other characters anyway, so games took like 12 minutes, it was boring, and then they found this other character who blew everyone else away, and it's just like, well, let's just never play this game again because it's crap.
Pretty much.
You know, that's just one example of many failed competitive fighting games. You know, we could have a whole podcast on that, but
yeah.
You know, it's no different.
Definitely.
So
yeah, but it's, you know, it's, I think even things that actually, you know what, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, because if Bill Simmons can do it, I can too. So I was talking to someone before this a little bit, and he was talking about how it's like he thinks combo-based fighting games are on the way out. Because he's like, it's boring to watch, and you know, he was talking about how it's like Lethal League and Smash are just like much more entertaining to watch for the audience. And it's like, I can kind of see that, maybe. It's like in Marvel, the combos do go on for a long time, and it's like maybe the audience doesn't know, like, hey, this is like where there could be a drop, this is exciting, I need to pay attention. It just kind of looks like a one-player game to them, and maybe that doesn't look interesting. So okay. I don't know. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, my take on that is, you know, I've and you know, we've discussed this, you know, off air, you know, but you know, to me that boils down to a simpler concept of, you know, the execution barrier for a fighting game, right? And because, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom 3
that's a good point, yeah.
At this point has I mean, it has I guess a normal execution barrier, and I have no frame of reference to that, so that's a horrible example. But let me explain to you this way: if I sat down and said, "Hey, I want you to get good at Marvel vs. Capcom 3," okay, sure. You know, let's say I give you these characters in let's say roughly a week. you could get down, enough stuff to do damage, you're going to win some games, right? But then if you take the game before that, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, you said, hey, I'm going to give you
3 years.
I mean, that game is so much more precise. Everything is much more tightened up.
Much higher execution barrier.
It's not even close. Like it's not even night and day different. Right. It's more than that.
So kind of what your thesis is here is that combo based fighting games, like there's more of an execution barrier than there is to something like Smash. So it's like you have to like actually take time to like learn the combos and like the specific combos to use in a particular situation.
Right.
So that gets less people into it, whereas like Smash you can pick up.
Right. And I think about it like this. Here's a great fighting game example. You can get people off the street and everything who will play Street Fighter 2 with you because it's very straightforward. I mean, there's combos in the game, but 3 hits do 75% or whatever. Right. So it's very, it's very poke based. Combos aren't the best. You can do other things and win without doing like 1,000 hit combo or something like that. Right. I think that, and I understand that. There's Street Fighter 5 discussion, which people like, please to God, please don't make this like Alpha 3 or something where it's low damage, 1,000 hit combos, stuff like that. I understand what the Lethal League Smash model is, but my only response to that is, in a Smash game, there's a reason that there's a time limit in tournament matches.
That's true. Yeah.
So,
because
back in the day when they didn't have timeouts, they, those early Smash games would take 30 minutes because movement's so free flowing in that game that they're like, we should put a time limit on this.
Yeah.
So,
as
people want to actually play this game.
Right, yeah. And as someone who isn't all that familiar with Smash, I watch that game and I just kind of like see characters flying around and like I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah,
and I feel like I understand fighting games for the most part.
Yeah,
and that's just kind of.
Yeah, and I went to a Smash tournament on Saturday, and I was carrying my fight stick around because I was playing Marvel 2 there, and I was having discussions with people there. It's like, oh, do you even consider Smash a fighting game? I'm like, yes. I wasn't here to, not here to offend anybody. I'm here to simply, play and get owned. Apparently,
when we were doing the last episode, when I was like doing the intro and everything, I wanted to like refer to Smash in like the proper genre and everything. So I went and looked on Wikipedia. I'm like, like what? This is like a brawler, right? That's how it's officially classified. No, like they had it on there as a fighting game. And I was like, huh?
Yeah, it has. I mean,
who am I to argue with Wikipedia?
Yeah, I don't know. I like I was telling people there, I'm the type of person I can appreciate, the beauty and differences of things. Like, going back to what I said in episode 2, I don't like Tekken. It doesn't do anything for me, but I respect people who love that and I want them to play it. Right. But, if I'm talking about something and you interject with Tekken is the greatest OMGs, then, I'm not going to, I'll probably say, no, it's crap because XYZ, in my opinion. But, generally, like, I was playing Smash. I enjoy playing Smash because there's things in Smash that I like that aren't in Marvel 3 and vice versa. And I can appreciate that. I enjoy them.
Like Sonic.
Yeah, well, he may not be in the game anymore if you ask me. But that's neither here nor there. Rip back throw. But anyway... yeah, it's just like I appreciate them for what they are, but to get back to the point, the rant you were going on, I think it's the execution barrier. I think that's what people see, and I mean it's a real thing.
Yeah, it definitely is.
My response to that is, this is kind of a get off my lawn kind of thing, but there are games like Marvel that people who like to discover combos and do huge combos and show off that flashy way. There's that. There's games like Street Fighter 4, which are much more, slower pace. It's like, my God, what a read, or my God, he put him in the perfect situation. People love that. So I mean, it's kind of like what you like, right? I mean,
and and as far as like general audience numbers go, I think the two games at EVO that had the most people watching were Smash and Marvel 3.
Yeah, I'm going to really show my age now, but when Marvel 2 came out,
my lawn!
Exactly, in the arcades. people were attracted to the game because it was 3 characters fighting 3 characters, or huge combos, huge, like, it's flashy, it was this crazy stuff, it's like, oh my god, X-Men are in this game, that's cool, and then you had, like, Street Fighter, it's just like, yeah, we've all played that, but we want to play this new stuff. And, it's, the Flash, the big blow-ups on Marvel 3, people like that, that's like, quote-unquote esports and stuff like that, it's there's a lot of excitement and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, anything can happen. And in Smash, it's kind of like that, too, but it's it's just, to me, it's just like relating, the concept of a glass cannon in a fighting game and then StarCraft. It's like, it's a completely different take. It's completely different, details on how StarCraft does it. But at the end of the day, you can boil it down to like, yeah, that's basically like an amazing unit or whatever, that it has one glaring weakness or something. It's like, instead of health, it can't see an air unit.
Right,
just
yeah.
completely destroyed.
Yeah.
That, right? So,
yeah.
It's like Smash, it's like, it has exciting stuff that, oh, wow,
I think, like a trade-off. Like, there definitely has to be some kind of trade-off to, like, something being incredible. Like, that can be health, that can be...
Exactly, yeah. Exactly my point, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Smash is more like, wow, I can't believe Mario beat Pikachu. That's not what it is, but, so, some people, it might be that, so...
Yeah. I think we might talk about trade-offs in the next episode.
Dun, dun, dun.
We'll see, yeah. Exactly. And so, I mean, just to kind of like really tie this all back to, kind of, we finished that other discussion. So it's like, I think it's like more than just, we were kind of talking about how it's like anything competitive really needs to have like appeal to different play styles.
Yeah.
And it's like even like things that aren't like video games, like you see that in like sports.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's like different teams will like in a, like, let's say basketball, for instance. Well, I think we both maybe know a little bit more about football, so maybe that's a better thing to go into. But it's like different teams will have like completely different styles and mindsets. Yeah. It's like certain teams. It's like they're like heavily like defensive based teams. It's like the Bears have been traditionally, which we'll see if they get back to. I don't know, or it's like I don't know, maybe I can think of another team that has like maybe the 49ers. I don't know.
Yeah.
Then again, they have like Montana, whatever. But it's like certain teams will have like a very like defensive mentality, and then others are like very offensive. And then certain teams, it's like they'll play like a West Coast offense.
Yeah.
Some will play like a college style offense.
Exactly.
It's like and like there are even like little trends in like how.
Oh yeah.
Like for instance, like a few years ago, like one of the things that was huge in the NFL was the Wildcat, where it's like a trick kind of offense where it's like you don't snap it to the quarterback, it's like you snap it to like the fullback. I don't know. Yeah,
and then now like the closest example of that right now is a no huddle offense.
You
just you don't huddle up. Generally, you huddle up before the offense calls a play, then they break out and go to the formation. Well, you complete the play in the no huddle offense. You just kind of motion with your hands and stuff, and the point is you're keeping up the pace, you're putting pressure on the defense, not being able to react in time. So, that's like the latest, trend.
Yeah.
Like that. And, that's in any competitive environment.
And I think that's good because, like, it keeps defenses, like, it gives them additional things to think about. It's like they're not...
Yeah,
they're preparing for something different, like every week and every year, instead of like, oh well, I learned how to draw up a defense, the 7th grade, and I'm doing the same thing all the time,
right
throughout my entire life. It's like you're constantly adapting to new things that people are doing. It also gives like audiences, something new to, new trends to follow, new things to.
And I heard something. To relate it to something that I don't think either one of us really have an interest to, but it goes exactly with what you're talking about. They were talking about the upcoming boxing match.
Nope, no interest.
And, someone said it's like, there's an old saying that, what makes a boxing match isn't 2 different fighters, it's 2 different styles.
Yeah, right.
So I'm just like, perfect example.
Yeah,
It's just like seeing like a zoner versus a rushdown guy in fighting games, or, a guy who's going to do an all-in on StarCraft versus some guy who's going to go, just completely late game. It's just like, oh my god, is he going to be able to react? And
right, yeah. And
like
the fact that it's like, first of all, I mean, the fact that it's like, you can have different styles, and it's
yes, exactly,
and it works like that. That makes it just more interesting and appealing.
Yes.
But it's like it also like makes like thinking about and discussing the fight like much more interesting. It's like if boxing was like such a one-dimensional thing, like whoever has the longest reach is just gonna win automatically. Then it's like who cares? Like there's nothing to discuss. It's like Mayweather has the longer reach, so he's gonna win no matter what.
Exactly.
Whereas like you can kind of it's more fun to like. Okay, well, this guy, he's more defensive. This guy is more flanking or whatever. It's a lot. It's another like dimension for you to kind of get into and sink your teeth into. It makes it more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, people like, you want. There's always different ways to approach problems, in life or at work or something. So, if there's a competitive outlet, it's like. I don't know, like if my idea at work is fixing something is X, but Y and Z is also viable. There's going to be people at work who naturally are inclined to pick Y as the solution or Z. But in a competitive outlet, those people are inclined to pick a different method. And like playing someone who thinks this is the way to play the game, and doing it like is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Like it's the styles clashing kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like, it's I mean. Once again, back to fighting games. I mean, it's like we see this all the time. Like in the FGC, it's like people will argue, like, "No, this character is the best. This character is the best." And to me, like they're completely missing the point. It's like the character is the best for whom? It's like certain characters, like it's like that might be great in this person's hands, who's like a natural pixie or whatever. But it's like this character might not be effective, like in another person's hands.
Yeah,
it's like people might say in Marvel 3, like, "Oh my God, Magneto's like the best character in the game." But, like for me, who's like a zoner, like I'm probably not going to do well with him, although we'll see shortly tonight. Preview. But, it's like, okay, like we had a character, okay, like people who generally think like the top 3 in this game are like Morgan, Zero, Virgil, and we had a player here who like tried to play Virgil for a while and didn't do well with him because like Virgil wasn't conducive to his style. So now he's picking 3 other characters who might be top tier anyway. But he's doing way better with them. So it's a point we kind of made in episode 2, but it bears repeating because it's a very interesting topic of discussion.
Unfortunately, the thing that what you're talking about is the secret about all that is that the hardest thing to tell someone is getting into fighting games. Let's say is like, yes, these are like Brad said, these are accepted. I don't know, 8 best characters in the game. These are Premier League and Marvel. It's a team-based game. It's like, yeah, you generally want to pick these out of these teams, but the problem, the one little hiccup is that no one can tell you exactly what your play style is, what your strengths are. You have to know that, and God knows I am the number one shining example of if you don't know, you can end up wasting a lot of your time on stuff that if you just would have played, X instead of Y, you'd be like, oh my God, but that's part of knowing yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And that's hard in anything, which business, personal, games, not to go too
and
heavy
that's,
here.
I think that's a great point. I think that's one of like the classic things that people miss, like when they try and give advice. They're not taking knowing yourself, knowing whoever they're talking to. They're not taking that into consideration. I know a book that both of us have read, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the rules is seek first to understand and then give advice. I don't know the exact
I know
chapter, but it's like you have to take into consideration like the person the situation they're in, the person they are, the style they use to. It's like people will try and give like kind of generalized advice, like be patient, and it's like if you're not a patient person, maybe that's not such great advice.
It's hard to do. It's like, hey, go take risk, Brad. Go in. More. It's Brad is risk adverse and that kind of stuff. So
absolutely am.
So it's just like with me, it'd be like, hey, sick with a team, burn. But anyway, but you have to know the person, and you have to know yourself at the end of the day.
Absolutely,
and that's the hardest thing to figure out.
Know thyself.
Yeah, exactly.
That's something I just came up with.
Yeah, I've never heard it before.
That is trademarked. Anyway, yeah, exactly. So, any final thoughts on kind of play styles? Any play styles that we didn't touch on? Any?
So something I was thinking about, when you first pitched this idea that you wanted me to talk about was it's a little bit off the beaten path on what we discussed generally, but it kind of fits in. Is there's kind of a different play style approach in like a single player game, and give me a second to explain it, and I guess really with the advent of the internet, and YouTube and anything, I think it's even more of a bigger deal. But like for example, like you play Super Mario Brothers 3, right? And most people just sit there and play the game, and you want to beat the game. Woo, woo, I save Toadstool. That's right, I said Toadstool, not Peach. Anyway, hashtag get off my lawn. Anyway, but there's that, and then there's people who play those games, and you can search for them on YouTube. You can search almost any game and type speed run, and people who want to play them as fast as possible. Yeah. And that's exciting. It's like, oh my god, how are they doing this? Yeah. Stuff like that. Or there's people, in other games like Grand Theft Auto, the easiest one that comes to mind. There are people who, when they sit down and play a game like that, or Final Fantasy or something, they've got to go collect everything. They've got to get 100% complete and stuff like that. So you're
looking at one of those people.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to say that. We knew that for sure. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of a different way of looking at it. Yeah, that it's like, and kind of like what you're saying. People, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to pick this character. I'm going to like struggle through the stuff. You can play Super Mario Brothers 3 100 times through. It's like, oh yeah, I know where everything is. But then it's like, I'm going to try to beat it as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. It's a new take on an old game. And then it's just like, I don't know. It can make things fun like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's kind of what I was thinking when you said the playstyle stuff. Because, my wife, she's really good at Super Mario Brothers 3. And, she showed me, like, all this stuff that I didn't even know there was there. I was like, wow. There's stuff like that I didn't know. And she's like, yeah, I wanted to find all the one-ups or whatever. I was like, wow, that's completely cool. And, it got me to thinking about this. But, it's just like, it's kind of crazy. It's just like, some people just want to beat a game and that's it. And I know they've discussed that in other previous podcasts and stuff.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
It's like speed runs really cool, 100%, whatever. Mm-hmm. Okay, here's one I just came up with. Finding glitches. Because God knows there are many,
There are people who love to do that.
Beating
as a developer, I
in like
very much appreciate those people.
But yeah, so single player has it too. It's a little bit.
Walk through this force field. God.
As I've brought up old memories and will never be on the podcast again.
Yeah.
So a well-designed game has replayability that you can play in completely different ideas, and different people can play it however they want. Everyone gets enjoyment out of it.
So that was my conversation with Andrew Roznovsky. Those are always a lot of fun. Would have liked to have gotten into the idea of game modes appealing to different play styles, but we were already running long, so have to save that for another time. I want to make sure I credit the music real quick. All of the music in this episode is from Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, because all we did was talk about it. And not only is the music from Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, but each of the tracks is one of the theme songs of each of the Avengers, because this Friday, finally Age of Ultron comes out. So, should be a lot of fun. Definitely looking forward to that. Do I think it's going to be some cinematic masterpiece that changes life as we know it? I doubt it, but I'm just hoping it's a really fun movie, and just really looking forward to seeing it. So I think that's going to do it for us this week. I think next week we'll talk about trade-offs, so definitely looking forward to that. So if you have any comments or questions, you can hit me up on Twitter at FBE Carnival, and until then, we'll be back next week with a new episode. Thanks.